Hello YouTube, welcome to part 3 of the Educated Barbarian focused on the happy life. And today we have a long episode in front of us because first off I want to recap chapter 3 because I left the end of the segment untouched because I felt that it connected well with chapter 4 and 5 that I want to cover in this particular episode. So if you remember, at the end of part 2, we had discussed the chapter named There Can Be No Happiness Without Virtue. And we're starting to talk and discuss the idea that there were values opposed to virtue, and they were described as arrogance, insolence, and tumor. Anything in reality that gives neither greatness nor security to the mind. And I felt that this is a very important thing because you will find that in defining virtue, you also have to define what is not virtue. And that's a mistake that many people make. If you want to teach someone, you can just tell them what is good and correct, but you can also teach them what is bad and incorrect. The issue of that method, of course, is that it's much less straightforward because if there is 1,000 ways to mess up a boiled egg, for example, there might only be 60 or 70 to do it properly. So you cannot approach concepts by teaching them incorrectly and then reaching out to the correct method. But pointing out the obvious mistakes in the way can be a good method as well. This is why when you teach, you have to find a balance. And it is something that I strive to do on this very channel. Epictetus also tells us that he that depends upon any other good becomes covetous of life. And so the very idea of envy, working against the development of virtue, is also very important in my mind. Because it's something that I've always found to be true. When you envy someone, you resent them for having something that you don't have. But on top of that, it also means that you're not actively working on it. Because I separate in my mind and in my head a certain level of admiration you have for someone and wanting to emulate them, which pushes you towards action, and the negative value of envy that has just you sit in your corner, seething with rage at the thought of something that you have convinced yourself you will never possess. That is the true errors of envy, is that it's you telling yourself to hate someone who has something because you have, again, convinced your own mind and spirit that you yourself will never achieve that. And so you see that lack of virtue is in many ways very vicious in its development in the human mind. Because virtue is free and indefatigable. Now, let's continue on that very topic. Epictetus tells us that he asks, who does not know that fools enjoy their pleasures and that there is great variety in the entertainment of wickedness? So this, I think I touched upon it last week, goes against also the very idea that pleasure could be linked with virtue. A very important theme, because for many people, if you just follow the way your body tells you to do things, you're going to be biologically inclined and you're going to seek endorphin, dopamine, instant gratification. In reality, humans are built like this. At least the bodies we were given and the way our hormones work are like this. We are constant slaves to gratification. And in reality, the ability to apply delayed gratification is a form of self-control that makes us human and help us graduate from simple animals. So it is also a very important value to possess for anyone wishing to develop virtue, because at the end of the day, keep in mind that the people who are not virtuous might still really like their life. That is the mistake also in believing that since virtue is the true key to happiness, there can exist no happiness without virtue. There can, but it's not true happiness. It's pleasure. Pleasure is not happiness. Most of the time when you're happy, you are not feeling any type of pleasure because pleasure is a spike, it's a hike, it's a high. Happiness is not a high, it's a constant. And so it is, of course, obvious that in life we want to aim for constants, and so that you should develop happiness through virtue instead of completely doing that and constantly getting spikes in pleasure that you call and mistake for happiness. Because if there are spikes, there are valleys. And that cannot be called happiness, because these moments that you spend depressed and wanting for that high end up defining your life. The mind itself has its variety of perverse pleasures as well as the body. And as insolence, self-conceit, pride, gaucherie, laziness, and the abusive wit of turning everything into ridicule, whereas virtue weights all this and corrects it. So also an oversight corrected by Epictetus before anyone can raise it. No, the issue with pleasure and the evil of it is not just found within the body, because at the end of the day, the body and the mind are connected. And so the spirit itself can also err on the path and on the way, and it can make the pursuit of virtue very difficult. Because something like, for example, what he describes here, the tendency to turn everything into ridicule is not linked to the body, it is purely spiritual. And I find with Epictetus that if there is one Stoic author that has managed to create writings that apply perfectly to our contemporary world, it is him. I am mind blown sometimes by what I read in this book, because it is like he had a time machine. What he describes here is a mindset that I personally call post-ironic behaviors. And these are the people who you see all the time. They tend to be younger adults, they tend to be men also, who turn everything into ridicule. Everything is the butt of the joke, everything is ironic, sarcastic, etc. And that is a defense mechanism. It's a defense mechanism because if you take the word as a joke, it excuses your failures because you can just tell yourself that it didn't really matter at the end because it's all a big circus. And so you end up living a life that is not worth living because you're constantly trying to just turn what is in reality your one shot at this, at doing something interesting and developing virtue, into a comedy skit. And I find that all of the people who are like this are people who are delusioned at some point or the other, or life was tough on them, and so they just resorted to that again as a defense mechanism because it allows them to not be disappointed anymore. Because if you go into life with no expectations for yourself and others, then you cannot be disappointed. But the issue is that it also means that you're going to live a life that has absolutely no meaning at the end. So be very careful with that, and with laziness, pride, etc. Or potential illnesses that the spirit can develop that are going to take you away from true virtue. It is the knowledge both of others and of itself. It is to be learned from itself, and the very well itself may be taught. So this is wisdom as a correcting force, which is interior and exterior. You learn a lot from others and you learn a lot from yourself, and you need both, I find, because the one that is constantly looking for others in terms of teachings is going to at some point be left with nothing because he failed to, one, teach himself, and two, become his own teacher. And I find that if we apply the teachings of Musashi, for example, who told you that if you observe everything, you will get lessons from everything, it connects beautifully with this because it is both at the same time, right? If you're constantly observant, the things that you see around you become your teachers, but you're the one who teaches yourself. You don't necessarily need someone to speak to you or to actually give you knowledge or wisdom to learn anything. I have found that nature is the best teacher there is. And there's a reason why walking in the forest or in nature, in the mountains, swimming in the sea, has the ability to reconnect you with your true self, is because it is like the best classroom ever. And so I encourage you to actually reconnect with nature as much as you can around you. It is by the impulse of virtue that we love virtue, so that the very way to virtue lies by virtue, which takes in also out of view the laws of human life. A very important lesson. Why do we love virtue? It's a question that you might ask, right? Why should I follow all of these strict guidelines when I could just follow my basic instincts and seek pleasure instead? Pleasure feels pretty good. My body even tells me that I like it, but it really doesn't tell me the same thing when I pursue virtue. So why exactly am I to do that? Well, it is here said, and I think it's highly correct, that virtue in itself develops the love of virtue, because once you start developing it, you start realizing that it is the truth. And I find that with exercise, it's the same. Try to talk to someone who's never trained into training, they look at you like you're crazy in the head. Why? Because they have never felt what it's like to train. Once you have experienced training and what it does for you, there can be no question in your head. The love of training explains training and vice versa. So it's the same for virtue. I encourage you to just jump into it and you will see that it's going to convince you to keep going. And so to lead people to virtue, you have to apply virtue. And to develop virtue, you have to practice virtue. It's really very simple. Some men do one thing bravely, but not another. They will shrink at infamy and bear up against poverty. We must labor and climb the hill if we will arrive at virtue, whose seat is upon the top of it. So, again, a balancing idea. With Epictetus, you see that his main goal, from what I take, my understanding is that he's constantly trying to make philosophy and then the assessment of virtue as open as possible so that most people can actually see themselves do it. I think that philosophy has a big problem nowadays is that it feels inachievable and it feels inaccessible. It seems reserved to the intellectual elite, and that's nonsense. Back in those days, philosophy was for the common people. It was actually mainly for the common people. And Epictetus brings you back to that reality when he tells you that even if you don't have it all down and you don't have a perfect application of panels of virtue, it does not mean that you're failing or you're not virtuous. It means that you're on your way. And that is normal. You're going to be really good at certain aspects of virtue and really bad at others. It's not an excuse to actually not do anything. You need to keep climbing up the hill. Because the seat of virtue is at the top. So regardless of where you are on your path and journey towards virtue, it truly doesn't matter. He that masters avarice and is truly good stands firm against ambition. He looks upon his last hour not as punishment, but as the equity of a common fate. He that subdues his carnal lusts shall easily keep himself untainted with any other. So here, to also complete what he says, he also wants you to know that even though the development of virtue looks to be really tough and there are all of these aspects and areas that you have to respect and explore and develop, he's also telling you that they all connect. Meaning that if someone is extremely good at rejecting money and greed, then most likely the sin of pride is also one that they're very resilient towards. And it also applies to lust, for example. I like the example about lust. If you can resist lust, it also means that you have a good understanding of what taints the soul, and therefore you're going to be really good at pushing the vices away. And I find that he didn't use lust and greed for no reason. Because if we were to create a pyramid of the cardinal sins, I would place lust and greed at the very top. That's personally my top two because most people are afflicted by one or the other. So if you manage to master one, you will see that it actually trickles down. And it opens new areas, sort of like lifting again. If you get really good at squatting, you're good at all knee flexion exercises now. It applies for sins and virtue as well. But virtue cannot lie hid, for the time will come that shall raise it again, even after it is buried, and deliver it from the malignity of the age that oppressed it. Immortal glory is the shadow of it, and keeps it company whether we will or not. A white pill, if you will. I know that for a lot of people, they see our common world, they see the state of the universe, and they think to themselves, wow, we messed it up and we're at a stage where it's impossible to redeem. And that is not true. I firmly believe that virtue and wisdom are values intrinsic to nature itself. It did not wait for humans to apprehend these themes to actually exist. And therefore, even if humans turn their back to it, they will always exist because they are logical. Just like if, for some reason, tomorrow the entirety of society decided to stop drinking water and they drank soda instead, I guarantee you that it doesn't mean that humans would lose the ability to recognize water as their main source of hydration. They would still know that. It's just that the cultural aspect would repress that, but it will actually have a resurgence at some point. And so does virtue, because it shall always rise again. Oppression has no power on it. It is immortal in its glory. And also, it keeps itself company whether we will or not. I love that sentence because it clearly shows that virtue doesn't really need us. We need virtue. For example, wisdom. Wisdom doesn't need humans to be applied. Wisdom is a gift that was bestowed upon us by God and nature. And so, With or without us, it exists, and it is in our best interest to apply it. But if we don't, again, no big deal for it, but it's a tragedy for us. When a man comes once to stand in need of fortune, his life is anxious, suspicious, timorous, dependent upon every moment, and in fear of all accidents. How can that man resign himself to God, or bear his lot, whatever it be, without murmuring and cheerfully submit to providence that shrinks at every motion of pleasure or pain? The final nail in the coffin on the pain discussion and topic and on the pleasure discussion and topic also, which are just physical and mean affliction of the human body in reality. What it said here is very important, because beyond just trying to diabolize pleasure as something that only fools can enjoy and that keeps you away from virtue, he says something more important. He explains to you that there are stages to human experiences. And there are stages that are going to be low, and there are stages that are going to be high. If you constantly stay at a low stage, how exactly do you expect to elevate yourself? Pleasure is the dealings of animals, beasts. It is a common trait amongst humans. You don't have to develop it. You are born with receptors and a body that pushes you towards pleasure. If you never actually manage to evolve from that, you are completely failing your mission as a human, because you will not be prepared for the day where you're asked to actually embrace higher purposes. You will be completely incapable, and you will be resentful. That's the thing too. You find with people who are constantly seeking pleasure that they lack mental preparedness, and they tend to be the people who complain all the time and who are not resilient, because resisting pleasure in itself is a form of resilience, and better applied when you are the one who is going to be the disher of pleasure. Keep in mind that you both create and receive pleasure. So when you resist it, in reality, you're not resisting anything. That's what he's trying to tell us here. He's saying, hey, I tell you to seek virtue for your own sake and to reject pleasure also for your own sake, but rejecting pleasure shouldn't even be a thing that you have to do, because you're the one who has actually decided to give yourself pleasure. Do you follow me here? It's like fear. If I tell you don't fear, what I'm telling you is, please stop putting in your head the feeling of fear. Please stop inflicting pleasure upon your body at the detriment of something else. It is the easiest thing in the world. So if you fail to do that, accessing true virtue is going to be really, really tough. He that is overcome with pleasure, so contemptible and weak an enemy, what will become of him when he comes to grapple with danger, necessity, torment, death, and the dissolution of nature itself? Okay, first off, the this towards pleasure I love, so contemptible and weak an enemy. He's telling you essentially, if you cannot even resist pleasure, which is such a weak drive, then you are going to have a tough time in life. But more importantly, he also lets you know that if you are ill prepared for such a simple task, then just be prepared or non-prepared as you wish when actual real shit goes down. Because keep in mind that if you are not even able to say no to something that you have full decisional power upon, aka pleasure, what happens when the world and the spirit of chaos throws things at you? Now you're even less in control, and most likely you're going to be crushed entirely. And keep in mind, he finishes this by saying death and the dissolution of nature itself. And that is something that I found in this word to be especially correct. People go insane when the systems or what they believe to be the natural order around them falls apart, because they are completely incapable of handling change at that level, because any level of change that is internal is already too much for them. Wealth, honor, and favor may come upon a man by chance. Nay, they may be cast upon him without so much as looking after them. But virtue is the work of industry and labor, and certainly it is worth the while to purchase that which brings all others along with it. So just to wrap up that chapter 3, Again, the idea that virtue is something you have to work for, and that is what makes it actually a favorable thing to pursue. Because all of the other things can just fall in your lap. But keep in mind that things that you obtain without pain or sacrifice most likely are not worth it. They could even be poison. Now, let us touch on chapter 4, which is named Philosophy is the Guide of Life. It begins as such. There is not any temptation, either of fortune or of appetite, that is not subject to our reason, nor any passion or affliction for which virtue has not provided a remedy. So we go from pleasure, that mean and lowly thing, and then we move on to the idea that philosophy is a guide. And the first real paragraph here introduces the concept of virtue as a bulletproof method to reject anything that could actually be damaging to you. So this is how it functions as a guide, because keep in mind that philosophy, wisdom and virtue are connected, but I'm going to talk about that later. So anything that is subject to our reason is under our control, and therefore if we apply virtue to it, it can be remedied. So it is truly the cure to all things. Philosophy is divided into moral, natural, and rational. The first concerns our manners, the second searches the works of nature, and the third furnishes us with propriety of words and arguments, and the faculty of distinguishing that we may not be imposed upon with tricks and fallacies. So a quick paragraph introducing the concepts that are going to be presented here. So you have philosophy that deals with the works of natures, and then you have the connection, the natural connection, that is going to be the pathway to wisdom and then virtue, as we will see later. But I like that distinction because you see that philosophy has several different aspects to it. And it's interesting to me because we always treat philosophy as one discipline, and you rarely hear about subcategories. The only subcategories that exist are the one that the authors created themselves. So for example, you have Stoicism, you have Taoism, you have any form of existentialism, etc., etc. But within these categories themselves exist subcategories, and understanding a broad painting of philosophy will help you actually get the most of it and apply it to your life. What does it profit us to know the true value of things if we be transported by our passion, or to master our appetites without understanding the when, the what, the how, and other circumstances of our proceedings? So here, I find and I believe that this is an important message, because the pursuit of philosophy without understanding why you pursue philosophy has led to disasters and has led to what I can only describe as a devaluation of philosophy itself. I have met many people who studied philosophy, all of them who actually had degrees in philosophy. And across the board, I have found that these people were led astray. They did not regard philosophy for what it is. They looked at it as a curiosity, as just something to talk about at a party in a salon. But that's a problem, because philosophy is to be applied to your life. If you're just going to jerk off on the page, then you are missing the point entirely. And that is something that Epictetus rightfully predicted here, because most likely there was already Pandexters at his time period who were not applying any of the things that they were speaking about in their books, which is terrible. So when you are on a path to gather virtue, you have to understand why. There's no point in being virtuous if you don't know why, because most likely you're not going to be virtuous then. The force of it is incredible, the force of philosophy. For it gives us the weakness of a man, the security of a spirit. In sickness, it is as good as a remedy to us. For whatsoever eases the mind is profitable also to the body. The physician may prescribe diet and exercise, and accommodate his rule and medicine to the disease. But it is philosophy that must bring us to a contempt of death, which is the remedy of all diseases. So a separation, again, what I love with Epictetus is that I read a paragraph and I apply a certain understanding to it, but then I see a flaw, and the flaw is corrected within like two lines. It's like he knows in his drafts, he knew exactly where the mistakes, not the mistakes, but the potential loopholes were, and he plugged them immediately. He's telling you, okay, yes, philosophy is to be applied, but this doesn't mean that it has to be practical all the time. Example, the physician applies practical aspects and remedies to your illness, but the true cure to the illness is philosophy, because philosophy is the guide to it all, and therefore it supersedes it all as well. The very shadow of glory carries a man of honor upon all dangers, to the contempt of fire and sword. And it were a shame if right reason should not inspire a generous resolution into a man of virtue. So here, the idea is this one. If we are to pursue virtue, we have to understand why, as I said. And we have to also understand that most likely these are not going to be mainly factual applications, and they can just exist in the form of philosophical guides that we then apply. All right. And then we have to understand also what will be the motivation that is going to carry us towards that. And Epictetus offers you the idea of glory. Because in reality, when you try to access glory, you are not glorious yet. So what do you pursue? You pursue a concept that is still purely spiritual, okay? It has no factual application in your life yet, which you can call, here he calls it a shadow, the shadow of glory. When you want to be virtuous, you pursue the shadow of virtue. And I find that a comforting precept, because it can be tough to try and become virtuous if you tell yourself you're starting from scratch. But if you believe that you're actually just applying building blocks to an already preconceived notion of virtue within yourself, then it's going to make it much easier for you. The same for lifting. Instead of thinking that you're getting bigger and you're trying to leave your small body behind and you're building the small body, try and think of it this way. You're trying to access a big body that already exists. It's already there for you, but the work you have to put in to get there is going to be the difference between if you actually manage to be big or not. It's the same for virtue. And so, if a man is willing to just give it up all for the very shadow of glory, then it would be a shame if right reason, aka virtue, should not inspire people who actually seek it. So the idea of being virtuous should be enough for you to seek it. One wise man helps another, even in the exercise of the virtues. So as you pursue that, you also become of help for others. Because when you pursue virtue, and that's a concept that has been discussed many times in meditations, it's not just for yourself. It's one, for the sake of the collective, because it makes you a better individual, but most importantly, the very pursuing of virtue makes you a better guide to help others also access it. So even without the application to the collective, you are already helping the collective. So it's something that is really flawless. There can be no reason that you can give me to explain why you are not to pursue virtue. For as one wicked man is contagious to another, and the more vices are mingled, the worse it is. So it is on the contrary with good men and their virtues. Perfect idea and perfect application of it. You see that a lot with people who are degenerates and who are just leaving virtue behind, is that they are deeply contagious. It's the reason why if you have kids, what you should really be paying attention to, if there are parents watching right now, is the type of people your kid hangs out with. Because I knew good kids when I was growing up who hanged out with the wrong crowd and they became poisoned and corrupted themselves. And the worst part is that they, after that, also were a bad influence on other kids. And the other way around is also true. I was lucky enough to always hang out with respectable children who are intellectual, who were respectful, who were raised properly, and therefore I was molded by them too. It's not just my parents who educated me, it's also my peers. Your kids are being educated by their peers. So watch out which peers they are, and for your own life as well. Be careful who you hang out with. But the good thing is that if you are virtuous, you can actually, what is the term? Infect others with your virtue, because Acts speak louder than words. And therefore, if you lead a life of virtue, it's going to be a more effective vector of virtue than if you just preached it. It is the bounty of nature that we live, but of philosophy that we live well, which is, in truth, a greater benefit than life itself. So, pleasure and virtue. Anyone lives life, anyone can seek pleasure, but not everyone actually masters life and lives well. So not everyone masters philosophy. And the idea that living well is more important than life itself, to me, is one, true. Two, shows that a lot of people are not really alive, meaning that they are not taking full ownership of the existence they were given because they just exist. Right? There's a difference between living and existing. They just exist because they are the victims of their basic instincts. And for you to claim to have a life, you have to master philosophy and virtue. No man is born wise, but wisdom and virtue require a tutor, though we can easily learn to be vicious without a master. It is philosophy that gives us a charity for our neighbor, that teaches us our duty to heaven, and exalts us to an agreement one with another. So, two very important sentences that are back to back that carry heavy concepts here. No man is born wise. So, the idea of virtue is one that rejects the notions of talent and of inborn abilities, because we're all born equal in the face of virtue. And so this also makes the concept much more interesting and valuable because it is one that needs to be accessed by everyone. No one is born with it. But he also tells you that for some people, you can learn to be vicious without a master. So again, keep in mind what I said about masters. He says that wisdom and virtue require a tutor. That tutor can be nature. Again, you wouldn't really need me to explain to you what is in these books. You can just read these books yourself. And even without these books, what Epictetus learned came from nature. Because even if he actually got a lot of knowledge from other books and other authors, they themselves at some point learned from nature. Because if you go back to the origin, which came first, nature or philosophy? It's like the egg and the chicken, but in this case, there's an actual answer. Nature came first, not philosophy. Philosophy copies nature, so you can learn by yourself. But interestingly enough, even though you still need nature to learn philosophy, you don't need nature at all to learn to be vicious, because the absence of virtue, viciousness, and sins are in a vacuum, in a sense. Meaning that they exist in nature, of course, but since they are, in a sense, in opposition with the very idea of the sublimation of nature, it explains why people who are disconnected from said nature still manage to develop these traits. And this is also the reason why they become more and more foreign and estranged from nature, is because the very type of deviances they developed was developed without its help. Meaning that the more wisdom you collect and the more virtuous you are, the more connected with nature, because nature in itself is the true source of wisdom. It is philosophy that gives us a charity for our neighbor. Okay, so here, I think it's a discussion that in the Western world is very prevalent. A lot of people tell you, oh, morality and the fact that you're not killing your neighbor because he refuses to give you his tomatoes is directly caused by Christianity. A lot of people will tell you that it's what brought us there, and I don't disagree. But I want you to know one thing. Even if the vector of moral and of virtue, which are not the same thing, we're going to discuss that when we discuss Nietzsche. Even if the vector is Christianity, Christianity did not invent virtue. And therefore, here, what he tells us is that the source of that charity is virtue. So, if we were to have a hierarchy again, Christianity is not the source, right? Virtue is the source. God is nature, okay? The creations of gods, which are religions, through their prophets, cannot be said to be at the source of goodness. God is at the source. Nature is at the source. That makes a ton of sense. Philosophy is the health of the mind. Let us look to that health first, and in the second place to that of the body, which may be had upon easier terms. For a strong arm, a robust constitution, or the skill of procuring things is not a philosopher's business. He does some things as a wise man and other things as he's a man, and he may have strength of body as well as of mind. But if he runs or casts the sledge, it were unjust to ascribe that to his wisdom, which is common to the greatest of fools. Okay, long paragraph, but very easy to sum up. There is here the start and the birth of something that then spun out of control completely, but within the Stoics was still pure, and that is the distinction between the body and the mind. What is said here is that the application of the body and the very just facts of life that is moving and doing things cannot be applied to wisdom because they are basic to all living creatures. Anything that surmounts that elevates the spirit and the mind, that is philosophy. But anything else cannot be called that. This is the way to heaven which nature has chalked out, and it is both secure and pleasant. There needs no train of servants, no pomp or equipage, to make good or passage, no money or letters of credit for expenses upon the voyage, but the graces of an honest mind will serve upon the way and makes us happy at our journey's end. So here, as you can see, I'm starting to run into sentences that tend to be more poetic than they are rhetoric. And that is usually the conclusion of chapters. You will see that Epictetus likes to start you with very basic instructions and a lot of information, and then he waxes lyrical about it. I like that method. I think that if it were in verse, it would be dangerous because it would actually hide the meaning. But I just want to share with you because this is interesting as well. The way to heaven is both secure and pleasant. You need nothing else but your own soul to make your way through that, to that place. All you need is an honest mind, and you will be happy, not only at your journey's end, but also throughout it. And that connects with what we call le pari de Pascal. I think in English you call that Pascal's bet or wager, which is the idea that believing in God or believing in nature, which are the same thing, is never a bad thing, because at the worst case scenario, God doesn't exist. Okay, you still led your life according to laws that allowed you to espouse virtue and to make yourself and others happy. So at the end of the day, it was all worth it. And it's the same for virtue according to the Stoics. To tell you my opinion now of the liberal sciences, I have no great esteem for anything that terminates in profit or money, and yet I shall allow them to be so far beneficial, as they only prepare the understanding without detaining it. They are but the rudiments of wisdom, and only then to be learned with the mind when it's capable of nothing better, and the knowledge of them is better worth the keeping than the acquiring. They do not so much as pretend to be the makings of us virtuous, but only to give us an aptitude of disposition to be so. All right, we touched upon something interesting here. The very idea of philosophy, or of social sciences in general, which are applications of what is an actual true assessment of philosophy. Philosophy is not sitting down and reading Plato. That's not philosophy. This is what I'm doing here is not philosophy. Philosophy is the consumption of greater concepts and the application to your life. And the ability to get that, to understand broad concepts, connect directly then to the ability to understand sentences and direct applications of said concept. But here there is a clear pecking order. What Epictetus tells us is that the true assessment and assessment of virtue comes through philosophy. But if you must, to be able to access philosophy, go through the liberal sciences first, then do so. But understand that they're not the end all be all. And that's what I discussed when I told you that most philosophy students are idiots, is because they look at it as an end all be all. They fail to look at the bigger picture. He also explains to you that anything that is done for profit, money, or glory, which is a lot of people who actually participate in these fields, ends up being for nothing because it loses sight of true philosophy. But he understands its place. You just need to make sure it doesn't consume you. What does it concern us? Which was the elder of the two, Homer or Hesiod? Or which was the taller, Helen or Hecuba? We take a great deal of pains to trace Ulysses in his wanderings, but were it not time as well spent to look to ourselves that we may not wander at all? Mind blown again by Epictetus' ability to decipher the thoughts of people who are to live thousands of years after his death, because he is here describing people who constantly look at the tree instead of the forest, who look at a small application of a concept instead of the broader concept itself, failing to understand that it is like a rope. If you have that broader understanding, then smaller concepts are nothing to you. You devour and digest them like this. But if you fail that, and you therefore do not have the stomach to start with the concept, you start with, again, a small application of it. But you can't stop there. Again, it's like a rope. You're supposed to climb the rope to access the broader concept. Too many people are satisfied with that tiny thing, and that's why their knowledge is also tiny. And this is what is said here. There is no need in splitting hair and wondering what did this and why did that. Look instead towards the greater lesson. Instead of thinking, oh, which way did Ulysses take? Look at his journey, look at the lessons, and apply them to your life. The true lesson of the tale and the journey of Ulysses is not, did he take that path towards that Iceland for what? No. It's the tasks and the difficulties he encountered that are teachers. These are the broader concepts. And the importance of it is for you to then be able to navigate through your own life, not to bicker with people about subtleties that truly don't matter. Teach me my duty to my country, to my father, to my wife, to mankind. What it is to me whether Penelope was honest or not. With this very mindset, we could take 95% of all philosophy books and burn them, because they concern themselves exactly what he speaks about here. Niceties, subtleties that don't matter, that don't actually contain any important concept at all. What truly matters is the underlying themes that apply to our life. Anything else is just ornaments. The astrologer tells me of Saturn and Mars in opposition, but I say, let them be as they will. Their courses and their positions are ordered them by an unchangeable decree of fate. Either they produce and point out the effects of all things, or else they signify them. If the former, what are we better for the knowledge of that which must of necessity come to pass? What are we, if the latter, that does it avail to us to foresee what we cannot avoid? So that whether we know or not know, the event will still be the same. The very concept of fortune telling and of believing in fate doesn't matter. And he destroyed it in like 6 lines. You have people who their entire identity is thinking that there is an unavoidable fate. The Stoics also believe that. They talk about fate all the time. But what he tells you here is this. If you truly believe that fate is unavoidable, why do you worry so much about it? Why do you write books and books and books about the fatos and what is the term the Arabs use? I will remember. It's fatum. The fatum. I said the Arabs. I think it's Latin. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because if you believe in it, that it's going to come to pass, then you shouldn't worry about it. If you don't believe in it, then you also shouldn't worry about it. All of that is just noises and words and just wind, useless wind. He that designs the institution of human life should not be over-curious of his words. It does not stand with his dignity to be solicitous about sounds and syllables, and to debase the mind of man with trivial things, placing wisdom in matters that are rather difficult than great. Sole disputations are only the sport of wits that play upon the catch and are fitter to be contemned than resolved. Same line of thinking here, I think. This is the science-based YouTube fitness, by the way. It's people who bicker about what is the best angle and 3% activation and 5% and chest and blah, blah, blah. And who are just doing that, they are losing sight of the institution of human life and they're just being curious. They're just observing words and they're looking at syllables and sounds. But all of that debases the mind of man with trivial things because it misplaces wisdom where it should not be. Because, and he says something incredible here. He says that they would rather place wisdom in matters that are difficult than great. It applies to your training and your life as well. Do not look for difficulty. Difficulty will look for you. Look for good. Look for greatness. Usually the path to greatness is going to be difficult. So you don't have to force yourself to find difficulty. It will find you. People who focus on difficulty and being complex end up losing path and losing sight of what is so important. What have we to do with frivolous and captious questions and impertinent niceties? Let us rather study how to deliver ourselves from sadness, fear, and the burden of all our secret lusts. Let us pass over all our most solemn levities and make haste to a good life, which is a thing that presses us. So he's recentering you. Because a lot of people will tell you again that philosophy is such a complicated topic that you have to start with small things. But most likely you will be stuck at the small things. Never lose sight of the broad picture. Never lose sight of the true nature of virtue itself, which is a globality, not an applicability and a point-by-point system. You have to study that with everything you have. He here lays things that are really important to life, and the ways to access them are only as important as the thing itself. So if you don't reach the thing and the concept to access virtue, it's all for nothing. And I'm going to leave you with what I personally consider a masterpiece. I'm going to give it my best read. We're actually going to stop at the end of chapter 4 because it, as I expected, was thick with knowledge. So let me read to you what is probably one of my favorite passages from the book. Our houses are on fire, our country invaded, our goods taken away, our children in danger, and, I might add in these, the calamities of earthquake, shipwrecks, and whatever else is most terrible. Is this a time for us now to be playing fast and loose with idle questions, which are in effect so many unprofitable riddles? Our duty is the cure of the mind rather than the delight of it. But we have only the words of wisdom without the works, and turn philosophy into a pleasure that was given for a remedy. What can be more ridiculous than for a man to neglect his manners and compose his style? We are sick and ulcerous, and must be lanced and sacrificed, and every man has as much business within himself as a physician in a common pestilence. Ponder this, read this, it's at the end of chapter 4 because it is applicable to you, to I, and the world around us. And I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you for watching and see you soon.